was working on microbial fuel cells. So with the astrobiology department at NASA Ames, we were exploring how to test and understand some of the electron transport pathways of an organism called Schwannella onedensis. And they can build these little tendrils to help with electron transport across their environment. I was specifically studying how to replicate that electron transport pathway in other model organisms and testing to understand how we can leverage those in long distance space travel.
Hallucinations, trust, and everything in between. This is where AI stops pretending and starts proving itself.
Welcome back to the AI Thought Leaders series here on Helical Brew, where we sit down with innovators reshaping how science and software work together. Today, we're joined by Masaki Yamada, head of product at Invert, where he's helping biomanufacturing teams quantify what's long been qualitative, trust in AI. From his early research days at NASA Ames to leading product strategy for a bioprocess AI assistant, Masaki's been exploring one of the most important questions in modern biotech. How do we know when AI is actually right? So we always like to start with a little bit of an icebreaker just to break things open, start the conversation. So Masaki, if you could anthropomorphize AI for a moment, what kind of lab partner would it be right now? Brilliant but unpredictable, or methodical and misunderstood?
Yeah, I think it really depends on how people are applying it these days. I mean, AI means so much across the board. It can be as simple as a simple regression to all the way to large language models that you can actually talk to. But we're seeing more and more these days with more kind of user interaction. It becomes a bit more of a very confident, but hopefully accountable lab partner. And the things that we'll talk about today and things that we've been working on at Invert is like, how do you provide transparency in what it's actually thinking and doing? So it's like, hallucination is a good thing ultimately, because there's creativity there to be able to explore what else you can test, but you don't want that in your data. So being able to make sure that you're actually executing something that's reproducible to get to an analysis that you care for, to explore more, is really important. So it's not going to know every single answer from the ground up. It's going to have the data that you're giving it, and you just need something to provide as evidence. So ideally confident, creative, accountable.
And could it be a cat?
I hope so. I would love that.
Would you like to introduce your current lab partner?
Oh, sure. Sitting in my lap is, his name is Senor Gâteau Beans Brûlés, or Gâteau, French for cake. For short. We like the pun. His name was Ghetto when he got him from the shelter. So he's my...
Love it. Love it. And chilling like a proper cat right there. Just
for now.
Hanging. Yeah, for now, right?
If you hear any crying babies in the background, it'll be him.
Learn the proper sound, right? If you're gonna make a noise, make this noise. It'll get you the most attention. Well, I like that. And also thinking about, we've talked about hallucination. It's been brought up on the show before, but it didn't have, that's a good thing on the end of it, right? When we were describing. So
that's the first time I've heard that.
That's the first time. And I like that angle. It makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like at work, this is work time. This is structured work. We need a certain output. And then a little bit of daydreaming time in between. It's like, well, our AIs are basically having a typical human workday. Right?
But I like the pivot that it's creative, right? And
yeah.
it introduces creativity.
Yeah. So we'll kick off segment 1 with titled Trust But Verify, the confidence problem with AI. And, why is trust such a difficult word when it comes to AI and biomanufacturing? What is the pushback,
Yeah, I mean, there's trust at a few levels. Once you get a process that you've locked and maybe step back a little bit. What is biomanufacturing for folks who are unfamiliar?
Sure.
Typically, many products are made through biological systems, whether that's enzymes in your detergents or therapies like monoclonal antibodies. You essentially need to grow these cells that produce something, whether it's a small molecule or a protein, and then extract it and purify it in a way that is reproducible and usable. And that comes with the fact that it's not a chemical reaction, and biological systems are incredibly complex. And so as you scale up these processes, the process itself can cost millions of dollars, and you want to make sure that you're spending all of those resources accordingly with the right understanding of what will happen if you change certain levers and what happens if things go wrong. so that you're not putting or delivering drugs to a patient that maybe provide adverse reactions and may be dangerous. So trust is important in a variety of ways, but it becomes much more difficult because biology is complex. You're not really modeling single variables all the time. You have this huge living network, and there's a lot of noise. So ultimately, you've got a lot of data that you need to process. And do you have enough data to do something useful? Do you know what the next experiment needs to be? And so trust is really trying to better understand, or what we found is understand what logic has taken you down this decision path to see what kind of answers you're getting. And can you reproduce it in various ways before you make your next decision of, are you going to change that operating condition? Or are you going to explore a different space because you have uncertainty? It relies quite a bit on that transparency and traceability aspect.
I got you. Yeah, because of the complexity, I imagine there's a lot of elements of trust coming into play before we even introduce an AI tool to the process, right? You're also, because it is so complex, there's a natural tendency, I assume, to be critical, right?
Absolutely.
As you're going along, right? It's because it is such a complex process.
And scientists and experimentation kind of rely on the fact that you can distrust and look for disproof to make sure that you're actually finding the right reason that things are happening and you're not just blindly negating the confounding factors. Even in the human world, where people are doing the calculations or the documentation or the analysis themselves, you still have huge quality departments that make sure that you need to verify all of the information that's getting passed through. And so I see us using AI as a lever to accelerate a lot of that, hopefully make that more robust, but also ensure that you have the right trust aspects in place.
Gotcha. And getting a little deeper in the topic, I mean, how do you define confidence when the outputs are probabilistic and biological systems are anything but clean?
I think it ultimately depends on how you're using AI overall. Confidence itself can be captured through uncertainty or dynamic measure, but most of the time we found structuring the questions to be something that we can then execute and reproduce as helping us better understand our confidence in an answer. So we're not asking the LLM necessarily to say, tell me how all these things happened. It's an investigative path, and then finding the information, leveraging transparency and what information was used. And then based off that data, which is not all of the data in the world, you can come up with an answer. And so building in statistical tools to calculate uncertainty is important, but also acknowledging what the reference data is in the first place is, I think, the larger component of making sure that you're not overstating your understanding.
But there's also an aspect of, I think there's a difficulty there because you might have a lot of data, and you mentioned this before, but you also have noise, right? So there's this level of curation before you're feeding it into the model. And so you have to build sort of tools around that part of it before it even goes in to what you're developing, correct?
Absolutely. And that's one of the bigger kind of gaps within biomanufacturing that I see day to day, is that even just getting your systems to output data in the relevant units or consistent units so that you can use that in a formula or name it the same thing, all of that is so simple and standard, but like it takes 90% of the time to actually get there. And you've got that noise that you then, how are your sensors different? How are you actually interpreting the data that you have in front of you? That humans make those inferred judgments all the time, but then can you encode that as well?
Gotcha. And so what metrics and methodologies are emerging to test the reliability of AI in this?
Yeah. So to give a little bit more context here, we've been building out an assistant that helps us ask questions to our data in biomanufacturing. And it's natural language based. And the best way that we found in current state of the art is to develop evals. So evaluations that give you allow to ask questions or add queries to structured context. So we create different data sets that represent various scenarios in bioprocessing, whether it's a design experiment for fermentation or an end-to-end process where you have fermentation, purification, filtration data, and we structure a query around it, and we have an idea of an answer. And sometimes they're objective and sometimes they're subjective, but because our tool builds the code and then executes on it and then does continued exploration, maybe pulling in more data across the board, there should many times be an objective answer. What is the highest titer of these processes, or when was the deviation that happened. As you start to get to the whys, those can be a bit more subjective of what was best if it's maybe understated. So there are various things that we track for to make sure that the agents are working in the way that we expect, and that's how we are kind of quantifying the reliability of, is this exploring the path that we would expect? Is it using the right tools? And then is it saying, I don't know, or asking follow-up questions when there's not enough information to be able to make something that's conclusive.
So that's interesting, because that makes it a more sophisticated model, right? Because you're not just linearly following one train of thought as you would think of it as a human being, right? You're actually also interrogating the answer within the model, having it interrogate the answer itself to find out, hey, is this actually what I think it is? That's what you just described Invert's doing, correct?
And how do you approach the human benchmark portion where, you're measuring the AI versus the, expert intuition?
Yeah, I mean, we have data scientists and bioprocess experts on staff that have been building out these evals. And actually, I'm not sure if you've talked about this already on the podcast, but for subjective questions, the current standard is using an LM as a judge. So you have your experts write out your answers of how they would approach it and what it should be. And then you use an LM to compare their output versus the expected output. And then you use that to continue the evaluation, and you have a variety of metrics that you can compare.
But how do you build intuition in, right? That's really difficult.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance. And as we think about capabilities and like whether it's using specific tools or how it's asking that, it's all dependent on the context and the prompt, and that changes over time. The models change over time too. So we use evals as a way to both monitor what's happening within our system to see it, make sure it's continuing to have some sort of capability, and then for benchmarking of can if we want to be able to solve this type of question, how do we get there, and how do we write a good eval or several evals to measure that capability and that it's responding in the way that we expect, and then optimize either building tools or sub-agents or more complex infrastructure to standardize that. So it's a more systems approach.
Awesome. Before we get into segment 2, I wanted to just take a little bit of a detour and just ask you about your experience at NASA Ames. I always was fascinated because I worked at
been on
company.
his mind.
It has been. I'm like, I got to ask. And so I'm going to put a little insert, in the program here. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what you did over there. So I worked over by off Shoreline in Mountain View, right? And the building we were in was owned by Google the entire time we were there. It was kind of an odd building because it had a gigantic lead vault in it, which somebody who was going to take over the office actually wanted to use it as their office. The fire department said, no, you cannot use that as your office. But the lead vault was for doing linear accelerator radiation source testing, right? So you needed a big, thick vault. But anyway, what was it like working there, and what were you doing there?
It was a pretty very cool campus. I started working there part-time as I was finishing up my senior year of undergrad. I was working on microbial fuel cells, so with the astrobiology department at NASA Ames, and we were exploring how to test and understand some of the electron transport pathways of an organism called Schwannella onedensis, and they can build these little tendrils to help with electron transport across their environment. I was specifically studying how to replicate that electron transport pathway in other model organisms and testing to understand how we can leverage those in long distance space travel for in situ resource utilization.
Interesting.
I'm so glad I asked because it's awesome.
That's so cool. I've been like rewatching the Alien series, so I'm all up in the space right now.
Yeah. And I think it's it's still many years away, but it's a really fun concept to understand. Like, if you're in a spaceship, you're stuck out somewhere for a very long time. What are the resources that you have available to you to be able to modify your environment, right? And as we have progressed in synthetic biology, being able to print DNA in a specific sequence to produce a protein of interest, whether it's a therapy or some sort of nutrient, or to be able to engineer biology to produce molecules that are necessary, you need some source of energy. You need some base components to make sure that you have the ability to create those molecules, but you can create very complex chemical changes through biology. And that's the intuition that we're exploring there. So I worked
Very cool.
there with John Cumbers, who's really big in Symbiote Beta. Started that out a few years later, and it was a really fun way to jumpstart into the industry. And then I moved into biopharma, and then finally into software.
So, all right, the next segment we're going to touch on a little bit of like qualifying the intelligence, right?
Mhm.
And sort of inside your company, Invert's framework, just to do a deeper dive to kind of better understand how you're. So, what does the Invert system look like under the hood when you from an AI standpoint? How is it implemented? You mentioned you have a natural language model to interpret user requests and things like that. Under the hood, how have you structured things? Just top level overview.
Yeah. So Invert at large is pulling data from various systems, whether it's bioreactors for real-time sensor data, or from ELNs to pull in metadata about the experiments, the conditions, why you ran them, what media lots you used, as well as analytical equipment. So what is the viability of the cells, or what is the titer of the molecule that you're trying to produce? We help centralize and contextualize that in Invert overall to make sure that it's standardized, so you understand what the relationship is compared to historical data or CDMO data or various other data that you've captured over time. In context with what is the downstream purification that where this molecule has gone. So being able to attach that as well. So you have this process lineage, you've got the online data, the offline data, and the metadata of the actual experimental condition. So we're surfacing that to our agent that is taking in the query as well as the context of the runs that are available. And the primary workhorse is Python generation. So we're assuming that having access to that data is great, but that's too much data to try to process in any context, even if we're getting to millions of tokens. And I'd rather be able to see something that is reproducible and reusable, especially if the data changes over time, or I want to run the same analysis over and over again as the experiments change. So the primary piece of the toolkit is being able to run analytical code that gives both transparency and reproducibility. From there, based on what that first data profiling looks like, we look at data quality. Does it have all of the data that's relevant, just like a scientist would? So we really have taken the approach of, if I were the scientist in the lab, how would I trust this information? How would I figure out whether it's worth actually asking the question? And we enforce parts of that through our workflows. So before we ask the question of what impacted titer and what experiment should we run next, based on the data that we have available, we should say, do we have enough of the information, and is this even worth asking, or should we go back and ask to provide all the titer data? Because I can't give you any answer about titer if I don't have it. And then from there, start doing more profiling of the data, building models to do predictions of various scenarios, and then providing a general summary of the outcome.
And how do you ensure objectivity, right, at the end of the day? And what are some of the surprises that you've uncovered along the way in testing?
I think prompting goes a long way.
Okay.
In figuring out tone and confidence in a variety of things, and really figuring out how and where do you want to have checkpoints to ask more questions, because you can tell it to be very confident, and it will go through a various path of saying this is absolutely the thing that you need to look at, and it could be completely wrong. And so being able to bring the human back in the loop is important for some of the more conversational exploration of, hey, it looks like there's this temperature deviation. Was that expected? And it might not be. But if it is, if it's part of the process already and maybe it hasn't been fully structured and defined, that's a useful piece of context to add to the rest of the conversation. So ensuring that the agent itself is not too cocky or too overconfident, and making sure it's inquisitive are key pieces of kind of the artistic push of prompt engineering or artistry that you may think about. And then thinking about tools that you can use. So sometimes you don't want it just to be generating random Python code, and you want it to be using very structured tools for computation. And that's where you may want to have orchestration to make sure that it is using those tools appropriately, because those have been verified and validated.
Gotcha. Well, in our next segment, we're going to look a little deeper into the paper to platform question and the data science thing, where, I mean, I walk into more and more labs and I see the electronic notebooks, more prevalent here and there. And it's interesting to have the conversation about, how is it going right? How is it going wrong? I think there's some, the interoperability for folks that are working in two different areas of the facility, right? And how they're, some tools are better optimized for certain data than others. But, as we see that transition where, AI is now a power tool that's available as part of that notebook process and tool, what does that really look like inside of a company? Since your product really interacts with all levels, right? It's just, the natural language interface to the user. You've got the data summaries, all the capability you've built in your product. How does that look like when you've implemented it at a company?
Yeah, I mean, the overall digital transformation journey for any company is, at least what I've seen across the board, is pretty slow
Yeah.
for one reason or another. But I think we as a company have been really able to shine is that people have made progress. They've been able to get from paper into something, and then we're able to help bring that to the last mile. So people are using software like Benchling, and that's great because the data is structured in a certain way, but it still may lack some things like time series data analysis or comprehensive tools to compare runs in various ways, or you may be lacking additional context that you're run into the siloing problem where different organizations have built different tools to help capture specific types of data, whether it's a historian or a LIMS or an ELN. You've got to still need to have a human to pull all that data together, then make an answer. That's where Invert thrives. You still need to document that data, right? And so I've seen when I was at Genentech, the transformation from paper to electronic batch records. And it took a very long time because you got to figure out how custom do you want to make it for what users? Is it just in the fermentation PD lab? Is it for every PD scientist? Is it also including MSAT? And how far do you want to go? And ultimately, it requires a lot of organizational change and a lot of patience because people are going to have different needs. And at the end of the day, they care about helping complete their job, not necessarily having to capture every single piece of information that's could be available, no matter how much the computer scientists or the engineers would want it. And so it's like, I'd say it's across my product career, I've seen a requirement of patience as well as compromise between all the things you could be doing and the things that are relevant and you should be doing. And I see a lot of opportunity these days of being able to help make more dynamic interfaces where you don't need to build a very bespoke application just for process scientists or for MSAT engineers, because you can generalize things where you can adapt the information that's available to make it useful for them, or to ensure that whatever data they are recording, you can extract and structure and then make it useful for other teams. And with that kind of quicker iteration cycle, you don't have the IT debt of having to support these forms that are now outdated 2 weeks later after you've launched them because you've added a new media component or something, or you have a new piece of a quality framework that you have to do a checklist on. And I'm optimistic that it will mean that organizations are able to adopt those tools more readily.
But I think a lot of the adoption also comes from, the tools changing, right? It's an example you gave for ELNs. When everyone was getting told to use electronic notebooks instead of their, paper notebooks that they liked very much, there was like this caveat of like, you have to carry your laptop everywhere. And do we have laptops segregated for the labs or laptops that are coming out of the labs? And as technology shifted and now we have iPads and other tablets that make it a little easier, adoption increases and that threshold decreases for people actually wanting to use your tools. So in what you're doing, right, you have to kind of take into account we don't want to fight people, but we want them to use these tools. So how do we make it the easiest pathway for them?
Absolutely. And for us, thankfully, a lot of it comes down to like, should we just integrate to the instrument? It's generating all this information. Can we help you reduce your already existing effort of having to export that and extract that and format that and do all of that work? But sometimes that leads to other noise of us having to try to figure out what is all this data relevant to. If you just label them samples 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's only so useful for anybody. And how do we build better interfaces in places where they do have the time or the patience, or can just maybe go through an approval flow or go through a deviation management flow where depending on how structured their workflows may be and how consistent their data is, allows them to access that data more quickly.
And what templates can we provide so that it doesn't end up on someone's computer in an Excel sheet somewhere?
Yes. The drift back into the spreadsheets, like the drift, evolutionary drift to crabs. I forgot what that concept is called, but I think it's carcinogenation. Anyways.
Are teams as digitized as they think they are? I mean, is it because you got anything?
I don't. I don't know if many teams think that they're digitized. Leadership,
a polarizing question.
May leadership may have invested in tools and say like, yeah, now we're digitalized, right? We spent millions of dollars on these things, and then you still see the person writing down the piece on the back of their glove, and
somebody's talking about digital,
right? I've seen a wide spectrum of maturity in the digital space. There are companies like Sanofi who've made huge strides in getting actionable insights to their data. And then there are smaller companies that need to start from scratch and considering like building versus buying. And then you've got some more larger archaic companies that have a lot of file cabinets, and that helps with compliance and other things and trust, but it makes things very, very slow.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. All types out there, and it does take a real top-down initiative inside a company. It's a lot of work. I think a lot more work than folks maybe think it's going to take initially. And which brings me to another question. I mean, are there any cultural, structural barriers that slow down adoption in general? Would you say?
I mean, I think it really comes back to how are you meeting them in their workflows, and how willing are they able to adapt some of those things? Like, are they doing? What is their pain point? Can you identify their pain point and make sure that you have the interface for them to accelerate rather than adding one more step in their workflow that's already pretty exhausting? So being able to take steps off of their plate has always been a really nice kind of change of pace. We're like, great, I don't have to deal with that anymore. Now I've got more time. Yeah. But if it's like, okay, now you've got to go to this new system and log in and go do these other 5 things before you can start doing your day work, you built resentment. And I've seen that as the losing strategy of like trying to enforce documentation in certain ways. Yeah.
Sounds like robotics in the late 90s and early 2000s in this industry. It's like, well, here are your keys to your robotic work cell. You got to lock it and then unlock this and then bypass this. And, it was way more of a process. You couldn't just walk up to the instrument and start using it. Definitely. And that certainly had some resistance at the time. It was like, I have no idea how to operate this thing. This is only, they end up with an expert, and one expert, if he's out of town and on vacation, well, and you're stuck. Yeah. I like how, standardization has come a long way for us, and also, miniaturization.
And I think back to the AI, just kind of general broad state of the industry, one of the other things that slows adoption is confusion and some enterprise level resistance to like, is my data safe? What are the security and standards that we can follow to make sure that I'm not losing all this IP to some black box model that's seeing all of this data? And so we thought as well about how do we ensure that we have security and safety in place to make sure that we're not exposing our customers' data to any nefarious places that could be taking in learnings and reducing some of the IP potential for the work that they're doing. Ensuring that they feel comfortable and understand the system and know where their data is going.
That's a good point, because I think that comes up quite a lot, like what are you doing with my data, right?
Yeah. And that leads to like, okay, I can't use any AI system at this company. And that leads to deceleration, unfortunately. So the more we can make that clear and the better standards that we have available, I think the faster we'll see adoption.
Yeah, I could see that could be a point of resistance. So what's the next step? What's the next phase after the digitization part of it is when are we going to start making AI, experimental decisions and designing on its own with the AI?
Absolutely. I mean,
it's going to do it all.
There's some physical safety constraints, especially in large automation, of ensuring that you're not going to blow up a tank and do a variety of that. But I could imagine from the scientific perspective, there's a lot of automated flows that can enable surfacing better questions. You've got all of this data in the background. It becomes overwhelming. As a human, I can only comprehend so many things. And so I only go and ask questions about the things I remember that are in the context of what I have. If we can have things running in the background that can surface the core key information, the decisions to be made, that is wonderful. that allows me to build better models, to look for predictions, to understand how to invest the time and money that I have to run my next experiment. And then ultimately being able to run these lights out manufacturing facilities where you have the ability to like predict that your titer is going to be impacted, your quality is going to be impacted because something has changed. So flag somebody in and be like, hey, can we do a double check to make sure that this quality is okay? Or should we make a change to the operating conditions or add some supplemental material? Being able to better understand that space moves towards automation. I think for a long time, it's going to still have people in the loop due to inherent safety concerns, but at least we will have more information to act on and more readily. It's not going to be a week later, you finally finish your deviation report and then can make a change to your process, but you can actually have that meaningfully actionable pretty quickly.
Yeah, a lot of the use cases that I hear about with these tools remind me a lot of how, cars evolves with more and more tools to help you as a driver pay attention, stay in the lane, just little subtle things, bump you in, bump your steering wheel a little bit, right? I mean, these are all, it's not autonomous, right? But it's significant augmented, data, sometimes preventing, side swipes and whatnot. I mean, getting out of the lane, right? Or for whatever reason it is that the car deviated. It's just keeping it on the rails and lowering your overall cost per mile at the end of the day, right? It's like in experimentation, you're lowering your costs and your risk of mistake. I mean, mistakes cost so much money in this.
And it also helps you start to focus on the other things you couldn't before. So there's a lot of noise in just like the experimental parameters of pH and temperature and being able to control that. But there's so much proteomic and genomic information that we haven't been able to focus on because that's another layer of noise that is hard to comprehend. And getting to be able to ask better questions because we have more attention on that will allow us hopefully to get to better control.
Gotcha.
So you've mentioned maybe the next phase under digitalization being this kind of cooperative partnership where humans are still in the loop. The way that you're building it now and the way that I've heard about it is AI systems are helping us analyze data faster. But in some respects, they actually actively propose next experiments and next pathways to go. Can you foresee a place where they start to run experiments where they support decision generation, but actually start moving beyond designing conditions, predicting outcomes to just real-time runs, and they can trigger, say, an automated system to, push the next workflow along?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of conversation about it. I think I'm optimistic overall that the space can make it happen. Some of the robotic and automated labs have had some moonshot ideas to be able to collect instrumentation and make that all happen together. I think there's still some physical constraints there that are important to acknowledge, right? You can only measure the things that you've calibrated in a way to measure. So you don't have infinite axes to better understand all of the data. There are some technologies like Raman spectroscopy and that are potentially useful for measuring certain more bespoke chemical interactions. You still probably need to develop an analytical method for things that you have explored that now are causing a problem, right? This new raw material has some other component that you haven't had to measure because it hasn't been a problem. And how do you get into that cycle of ensuring you have the ways to capture the right information? And I don't think that's going to necessarily be fully solved by automation, because there's physical methods and new materials that need to be developed to ensure that you can actually separate the DNA appropriately and start to optimize further past what we see as the process today.
But I definitely can see a path to this closed learning loop, right? Where the data feeds the models drive the experiments, and then experiments refine the models continuously. And that's what I think of as moving from where we started, right? Which is digital record keeping to digital orchestration to potentially digital cognition, right? With this closed loop model.
Yep.
Digital cognition. Dun, 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 dun. That's, yeah. So I think the implementation piece of it is, for me, the most fascinating because I'm so heavily involved in the robotics space. I'm also, sitting there in the sidelines going, yes, robot be driven by an AI decision, and do its thing. So, because a robot is just an extension of whatever's controlling it. And so just to see that take over is awesome. So, but if you could redesign like how a lab integrates AI into their daily operations, where would you start? I mean, is there a kind of a systematic thing that you like, if this was just different across the board, that would be great?
Oh, wow.
He probably has a wish list.
Well, I mean, I also, between Genentech and Invert, I was at Culture Biosciences, which is formerly Culture Robotics. So a lot of workflow automation there. And then I was at Stratios for a bit as well, formerly Transcriptic. So I've thought a lot about orchestrating instruments together. But within the scientific workflow, I think discovery and being able to challenge ideas and seeing what gaps that you have, surfacing information about what has been done and what has not been done, and that differentiation I think is really important, because that helps you build the next hypothesis. So I don't know ultimately what changes has the biggest lever in, like, should we build a bigger Hamilton robot for more like microscopic like experimentation, or like microliter type one-off large volume experimentation. But I do think that being able to narrow down the space of what is worthwhile for new data generation is important. And you have so many axes that you can experiment on and test on. Obviously, you're limited by reagents and the physical limitations of the world. But being able to do experiments more systematically without wasting time, because you don't need to repeat things, I think is going to be hopefully saving us a lot of money and a lot of time in the scientific method. And being able to share that data across to larger organizations and hopefully lead to better open science. Fingers crossed. I don't know. We'll see how the industry progresses, but I would love to see alignment of data through standardization, or even if there isn't standardization, the adaptation of the data, because you can more quickly process and begin to compare where the data came from and if it's relevant and what the world knows in terms of this kind of piece of scientific progress.
And I think that's where I'm interested. I think what we should all be striving for as human beings is, hey, we're making these decision times, shorter, we're driving things faster, but what is the purpose? The purpose is to learn and how we can advance theories and scientific breakthroughs for the benefit of people and healthcare and other things that matter, right?
Yeah, you see all these collaborations happening way more often than they used to, just in the past 20 years. I feel like this industry is getting to where you really have to collaborate. Yeah. I mean, you need to have, collaboration built into your company and process and culture just to be able to find the next thing. It's like somebody was explaining to me, it's like, well, you go back, 50 years at Bayer, chemistry company, a lot of stuff was undiscovered, hadn't been discovered yet. Right. So it was undiscovered country, and all the things that were discovered at that time. It's like, well, it's harder to discover stuff now. It's more complicated and you need more data to do it. And the business models, you can tell, are certainly changing around the industry.
Yeah. Share your data.
Yeah, the sharing, I mean, there's still a transaction involved, but there's like, okay, let's make a deal, at some point. It seems like every month I read about some partnership between two normally independent companies partnering on a particular project for that reason. So, I mean, what's your vision, your personal vision of the AI native scientist in the next decade? Like, what's the?
I mean, I think in order for it to work, we need to ensure that we have instilled a good sense of traceability. How do we get to the answer? How do we actually verify it? Like, one fear that I have is kind of defaulting to assuming that things are correct because an AI expert says that it's correct. Like, I still, because there's an overwhelming amount of data, it's also going to be hard to go back and verify that all those things are true. And like LLMs, it's not, or any neural net, it's very hard to see how an answer came to be the answer that is put in front of you. But having clarity about what things were trained on and how you got to use original information to come to an answer will help people think about problems in a different way, or help accelerate what they can think about next. So if there is more confidence because it is traceable and transparent, you build the confidence, and then you can start focusing on things that you haven't thought about yet. So I still see AI, like native scientists, to be enabling a new focus on the things that you haven't been able to spend your time on. So surfacing insight, surfacing, here is the landscape of the things we know, here are the landscape of the things we haven't even asked yet. And that's why we should spend our time asking those next set of questions and spending our time in these experiments, because we already have some confidence that this other part is explored. And I think it'll be a while before we see like fully robotic lab trying to like accelerate to some goal. So I see the near term AI science application is partnership of how do we help enable the next level of creative thought for the scientists who are working on them in the lab themselves.
Gotcha. Well, that's been a absolutely fantastic discussion. Glad we could have you on the show, and there was some last minute scheduling changes and things like that. And we are arriving on our famous segment of the show. Sura was giving a little heads up. It's our pick of the week segment, where it could be anything. I've my pick of the week is actually something physical, device thing, but it could also be a website, a tool, a book, methodology, anything you've been working with or reading in recent times that you would recommend.
Well, I just finished reading the Stormlight series, and I don't know if other fantasy Brandon Sanderson fans, but that's the most recent thing on my mind. I thought it has some fun takes on.
On your Kindle, or do you have a physical book?
I have the physical books, and they are large tomes.
Oh yeah. These are these are like the Stephen King, if you get them in paperback, the little like monster. You see? Yeah.
Nice.
It's like 10 iPhones stacked on top of one another. Yeah. These are large. That's cool.
It's a fun kind of adventure into magic and magical systems and larger introspection about society and societal norms and how things are embedded within general humanity. But that's more of just like the books that I've been reading recently. But thinking about applications in the AI space, really like figuring out how do we design around uncertainty, I think is the most interesting or important thing that we can like align around these days. Of how do we know when we don't know? How do we know what we need to explore next? Those are all like driving towards some of the fundamental questions of how does an AI scientist move forward? If it's overly confident and saying that this is the answer without any justification, even if it has justifications, over biasing that is the direct answer, we're not going to make any progress. So I'm very curious to see how that progresses, that way of thinking progresses across time.
Awesome.
I'm
Sura,
gonna look into that book series. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I got it right here. But we'll put it in the show notes when we publish. Any other picks of the week, actually, before I move on to Sura, Masaki? Any other? Could be,
We've had one guest that had like tons, and we love it. We just provide links for everyone.
Those are the main ones that I had top of mind.
Okay. Sura, anything?
I do not have any. I have been.
None?
No, I just.
This is also very famous. There's no pick of the week.
But I'll come back and have like 3 like 6 months later.
Yeah. All right, going to my pick of the week. So, I have these things. I always seen people use these things, but I'm like, I'm not sticking that to my phone. That's
You've dropped it.
I did. It's one of these. It's one of these things you can hold onto your phone, right? It's just a way to hold onto your phone, and but normally you have to stick them on. So they actually make one now that's MagSafe compatible, so you could just it's got the magnet, and it's pretty darn powerful. Like it's not it's not going anywhere.
You didn't buy that, did you?
I did. It wasn't very.
You could 3D print it and then get a magnet, and then you got it going. There you go.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the amount of force you have to use to pull this thing off. I don't know if
that looked hardcore.
I don't know if that would make it. The other thing I got, which is, I don't know if this company's going to last very long, but they happen to be around when I stumbled upon them. this, any guesses? I mean, so it's, you can see that it can open a bottle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what does this part look like? This bit here that you might use almost every day if you have to commute to work.
Seatbelt?
Yeah. This, for those that have, more and more, every seatbelt receiver on a car now has a sensor. And if you drive the car over a certain speed, it will bother you. Some cars bother you to the point of just, it'll drive you crazy. And I, in working robotics, sometimes I need to put heavy stuff on this back seat.
Oh, and it keeps beeping at you that you need the, yeah.
So I bought a stack of these guys here. And this thing is, we'll put it's called the ticket. So don't use this if you're sitting in the seat. I will just, normal T's and C's legal framework, README statement there. But yeah, it's called the ticket, which is aptly named, right?
That's cool.
You're going to get a ticket if you're using this. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But
my car bothered me for 15 minutes because I had heavy groceries on this passenger seat. I was like, yeah.
Sura, right here. $5. $5.
You could probably also 3D print that.
You could crack a beer when you get. I mean, this thing has got law enforcement written all over it. It can bypass the seatbelt, so you get pulled over because you're not wearing a seatbelt.
You can open a beer,
and you can open a beer, so you get your open container thing right here too. That's it's pretty funny.
Not endorsed by the Helical Brew.
Not endorsed by the Helical Brew. However, if you need to carry a robot like a Precise 400, lay it across the seat. It's going to make it beep. And for those of us that have to put equipment in our cars, sometimes I think this can be handy. So anyway, that's my
pretty cool gadgets.
I know, and they literally they work together.
Oh, and you can just
they work together and they fit in your pocket. So this is I think my cheapest pick of the week ever. Usually they're over $100, but both of these you could get for less than 10. So Masaki, thanks so much for coming on the show and taking out your Friday. But for those who want to, reach out and connect with Masaki on LinkedIn, Masaki Yamada, you can look him up there. And also, if you'd like to learn more about Invert, you need to go over to invert.bio. One of the things I did want to mention, I thought was cool about Invert on the website. So when I did some research about your company, I went to the, about the company page, and on the top it says, increasing the GDP of biology. I like that. It's a good slogan. Yeah. So
love it.
Until next time, this episode of Helical Brew is brewed.
Thank you for joining us on the Helical Brew. We're glad to have you with us. For more episodes, please visit our website at helicalbrew.com. That's helicalbrew.com.